The 1939 New York Yankees outscored their opponents by 411 runs. No team in baseball history has ever done that. Not the 1927 Yankees with Ruth and Gehrig and Murderers Row. Not the 1998 Yankees. Not any team, in any era, in over a century of professional baseball. 106 wins, 45 losses, a pennant won by 17 games. Their fourth consecutive championship, the first time any team had ever won 4 World Series in a row. They posted the best road record in American League history. This was a team built on depth. 5 players drove in 100 runs or more. The pitching staff had 8 different starters. The manager had never lost a World Series in his career. Every position on the field had a player who could beat you. And they did all of this after losing Lou Gehrig, the greatest first baseman in baseball history, to a fatal disease in early May. And after losing Joe DiMaggio, the best player on the roster, to a leg injury for the entire month of May. 2 of their best players were gone at the same time. The team got better. The team that turned the most heartbreaking moment in baseball history into the most dominant season the sport has ever seen. This is the story of the 1939 New York Yankees. The 1939 Yankees did not come out of nowhere. They were the product of a dynasty that had been building since 1936, when a 21-year-old center fielder named Joe DiMaggio arrived from San Francisco and immediately transformed the franchise. From 1936 through 1938, the Yankees won 3 consecutive World Series championships. They beat the New York Giants in 6 games in 1936, beat them again in 5 games in 1937, and swept the Chicago Cubs in 4 games in 1938. They were the most dominant team in baseball, and they were getting better every year. The core was extraordinary. Lou Gehrig was still producing at an elite level, hitting .295 with 29 home runs in 1938. DiMaggio had emerged as the best all-around player in the American League. Bill Dickey was the best hitting catcher in baseball. Red Ruffing was a 20-game winner 3 years running. Joe Gordon had arrived at second base and immediately become one of the most dynamic players in the league. Manager Joe McCarthy, the man they called Mars Joe, ran the operation with quiet, relentless efficiency. McCarthy was not a former star. He had never played a single game in the major leagues. He was a minor league player who discovered that his true talent was not hitting baseballs, but managing the men who hit them. He had managed the Yankees since 1931 and had never lost a World Series. Not once. Every time he reached October, his team won. His career winning percentage of .614 was the highest of any manager in baseball history, with more than 1,000 wins. McCarthy demanded perfection in every detail. He insisted his players wear jackets and ties on the road. He banned card games in the clubhouse because he thought they caused arguments. He ran practices with military precision. He never raised his voice. But every player knew that crossing Joe McCarthy was a mistake you only made once. His players respected him not because they feared him, but because they knew he was always right. Everything pointed to a 4th consecutive championship in 1939. The roster was deeper than ever. The pitching staff was the best in the American League. DiMaggio was entering his prime at 24 years old. Gordon was improving with every game. A 22-year-old rookie outfielder named Charlie Keller had torn through the minor leagues, hitting .365 at Newark in the International League, and was ready to contribute at the highest level. There was only one problem. Something was wrong with Lou Gehrig. The signs had appeared late in the 1938 season. Gehrig's bat speed had slowed. His movements around first base had become sluggish. He tripped over his own feet on routine plays. His batting average, which had been over .350 as recently as 1937, dropped to .295. His power numbers fell. He looked, for the first time in his career, old. But everyone assumed it was just age. Gehrig was 35. He had played in every game for 14 consecutive years. More than 2,000 straight games of crouching, stretching, sprinting, sliding, and absorbing the daily punishment that a major league season inflicts on the human body. Of course, he was slowing down. He would rest in the off-season, come back fresh in the spring, and be Lou Gehrig again. He was not Lou Gehrig again. During spring training in 1939 at St. Petersburg, Florida, the decline accelerated in ways that were alarming. Gehrig was slower than ever. He could not grip the bat properly. His hands shook. He stumbled on the base paths. Ground balls that he had scooped effortlessly for 17 years now rolled through his legs. His teammates watched in silence, unsure of what to say, afraid to acknowledge what they were seeing. Some averted their eyes in the dugout when Gehrig struggled through at-bats that he would have dominated just 2 years earlier. Manager McCarthy later admitted that he saw the deterioration clearly, but could not bring himself to bench the greatest first baseman who had ever lived. The regular season began, and Gehrig was even worse. Through the first 8 games, he was batting .143 with just 1 run batted in. His fielding was painful to watch. Balls that he once scooped effortlessly now rolled past his glove. At Yankee Stadium, fans who had cheered for him for 17 seasons began to boo. The sound of those boos must have cut deeper than any fastball ever could. On April 30th, Gehrig played his final game. He went 0 for 4 in a 3-2 loss to the Washington Senators. In one at-bat, he grounded weakly to the pitcher and could barely run to first base. The crowd fell silent. His teammates stared at the ground. 2 days later, after an off day for travel, at the Book Cadillac Hotel in Detroit, Gehrig walked into manager Joe McCarthy's room early in the morning. His face was drawn. His body was failing him in ways he could not understand. He said the words that ended an era. "I have not been a bit of good to the team since the season started. It would not be fair to the other boys for me to stay in there." McCarthy fought back tears. "I told him it would be as he wished," McCarthy told reporters later. "Like everybody else, I am sorry to see it happen. I told him not to worry. Maybe the warm weather will bring him around. We will miss him. You cannot escape that fact, but I think he is doing the proper thing." That afternoon at Briggs Stadium, McCarthy asked Gehrig to carry the lineup card to home plate, as he always did as team captain. When Tiger radio announcer Ty Tyson informed the crowd that Lou Gehrig had pulled himself from the lineup for the first time since June 1, 1925, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then the Detroit fans, the opposing fans in an opposing city, gave Lou Gehrig a standing ovation that shook the old ballpark. He tipped his cap and walked back to the dugout, with tears streaming down his face. His consecutive games streak ended at 2,130. Babe Dahlgren took his place at first base. The Yankees won 22-2. Gehrig sat on the bench and tried not to cry. In a haunting coincidence, Wally Pipp, the man Gehrig had replaced at first base in 1925, was in the stands that day. Gehrig never played again. In June, doctors at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, delivered the devastating diagnosis: amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a disease with no treatment and no cure. His muscles would progressively weaken until his body could no longer function. He was given 2 to 3 years to live. On June 21st, the Yankees announced his official retirement. They scheduled Lou Gehrig Appreciation Day for July 4th at Yankee Stadium, between games of a doubleheader against the Washington Senators. The ceremony was extraordinary. 61,808 fans filled the stadium on a warm summer afternoon. The 1927 Murderers Row team, the team many still considered the greatest ever assembled, came back for the occasion. Babe Ruth was there, heavier now, retired for 4 years, but still the most famous athlete in America. He and Gehrig had not spoken in years, their friendship destroyed by a personal dispute that neither man ever fully explained. But on this day, none of that mattered. Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia called Gehrig the greatest prototype of good sportsmanship and citizenship. Postmaster General James Farley predicted that for generations to come, boys who play baseball will point with pride to your record. McCarthy, Gehrig's manager and one of the toughest men in baseball, tried to speak about what Gehrig meant to him and could barely get the words out. His voice cracked, his eyes filled with tears. He stepped away from the microphone. Then Gehrig approached. He had not prepared a speech. Nobody had written words for him. He spoke from his heart for approximately 2 minutes, his voice echoing through the stadium's loudspeakers, which were broadcasting a Yankees game for the first time that season. "For the past 2 weeks, you have been reading about the bad break I got," he began. "Yet today I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth." He thanked his teammates. He thanked the opposing players. He thanked his wife Eleanor. He thanked his mother and father. He called the fans grand. The crowd stood and cheered for nearly 2 minutes. Babe Ruth, who had not spoken to Gehrig in years, walked across the field and embraced him. A band played "I Love You Truly." Even the reporters in the press box had to look away. The Yankees retired his number 4 that afternoon. It was the first time any team in any professional sport had retired a uniform number. Every retired number, hanging in every stadium in every sport in the world, traces back to that moment at Yankee Stadium on July 4, 1939. Gehrig remained in uniform for the rest of the season, sitting in the dugout, cheering on his teammates from the bench. He could not play. He could barely walk without stumbling. Footage from the World Series shows him sitting in the dugout, watching Game 2, his body visibly thinner, his face gaunt, his hands resting in his lap. But he was there. He traveled with the team. He sat in his usual spot. He clapped when his teammates did something great. The players drew strength from his presence, knowing that a man who was dying was still showing up every day. If Gehrig could be there, what excuse did anyone else have? Later that year, in a special election, the Baseball Hall of Fame waived its standard 5-year waiting period and inducted Gehrig immediately. He was the youngest player ever enshrined at 36. He never had a formal induction ceremony. What the 1939 Yankees did after losing Lou Gehrig should not have been possible. They did not just survive without the greatest first baseman in baseball history, they thrived. They dominated. They set records that still stand nearly a century later. After Gehrig benched himself on May 2nd, the Yankees won 27 of their next 31 games. The grief did not destroy them. It fueled them. Dahlgren, stepping into the most unenviable role in baseball history, received personal encouragement from Gehrig himself despite the weight of replacing a legend. The players channeled their sorrow into a level of play that bordered on ruthless. McCarthy managed the emotional weight of Gehrig's absence with the same stoic efficiency he brought to everything else, never letting the situation become an excuse for anything short of excellence. DiMaggio missed the entire month of May with a leg injury, so the Yankees lost their best hitter and their best first baseman in the same month. It did not matter. The rest of the roster was so deep, so talented, so relentlessly professional that they kept winning. When DiMaggio returned in June, he played the best baseball of his life. He hit .381 for the season, a career high with 30 home runs and 126 runs batted in. He struck out only 20 times in 462 at-bats, a ratio that still looks like a typo. The baseball writers gave him his first American League MVP award, and for once, nobody argued about the result. Bill Dickey hit .302 with 24 home runs and 105 runs batted in behind the plate. He was a future Hall of Famer in the prime of his career, one of the finest hitting catchers in the history of the game, and his work managing the pitching staff was as valuable as anything he did with the battee. Joe Gordon was only in his second full season, but he played like a 10-year veteran. He hit 28 home runs and drove in 111 runs from second base. Extraordinary numbers for the position. He was quick, athletic, and fearless, the kind of player who made the difficult look routine and the impossible look easy. Red Rolfe played third base and led the American League in hits with 213, runs scored with 139, and doubles. He also set a modern major league record, by scoring in 18 consecutive games from August 9th through August 25th, tallying 30 runs during the streak. It was a record that would stand for over 60 years until Kenny Lofton tied it in 2000. Charlie Keller arrived as a 22-year-old rookie from Middletown, Maryland, and immediately looked like a superstar. He had hit .365 at Newark in the International League the year before, destroying minor league pitching so completely that the Yankees could not justify keeping him down any longer. He hit .334 in his first major league season with raw power that earned him the nickname King Kong. He was built like a bull, with thick forearms and a compact swing that launched balls into the upper decks. The veterans on the team were not threatened by him. They embraced him. On a roster this loaded, there was room for everyone. George Selkirk, the man who had replaced Babe Ruth in the outfield in 1935 and had endured years of impossible pressure wearing Ruth's old position, hit 21 home runs and drove in 101 runs. He had learned to ignore the comparisons. He would never be Babe Ruth. Nobody would. But he was George Selkirk, and George Selkirk was good enough to drive in 100 runs for a championship team. Tommy Henrich, nicknamed Old Reliable, expanded into an everyday role and provided steady clutch at-bats throughout the season. And Babe Dahlgren, the man who replaced the irreplaceable Lou Gehrig, did not try to be something he was not. He hit .235 with 15 home runs and 89 runs batted in, while playing solid defense at first base. He was exactly what the team needed: competent, reliable, and smart enough to stay out of the way of the stars around him. The pitching staff was the best in the American League and arguably the deepest in baseball history to that point. While the American League as a whole batted .279 in 1939, opposing hitters managed just .241 against Yankees pitching. That 38-point gap between the league average and what hitters produced against the Yankees is staggering. It meant that good hitters became average hitters, and average hitters became helpless ones the moment they stepped into the box against a Yankees pitcher. 8 different pitchers started between 10 and 28 games. It was a committee approach, a rotation built on depth rather than on 1 or 2 aces. But every member of the committee was excellent, and the combination was devastating. Red Ruffing was the ace, going 21-7 with a 2.93 earned run average for his 4th consecutive 20-win season. He was a Hall of Famer who also happened to be one of the best hitting pitchers in baseball, batting .307 that year. He once pitched a 21-0 shutout against the Philadelphia Athletics and collected 4 hits in the same game. Lefty Gomez, the other Hall of Famer on the staff, went 12-8. He was the team's resident comedian, famous for saying, "I am the guy that made Joe DiMaggio famous." His sense of humor kept the clubhouse loose during the most emotionally difficult season in franchise history. Monty Pearson went 12-5, Bump Hadley went 12-6, Oral Hildebrand went 10-4. Steve Sundra posted an extraordinary 11-1 record as a reliever and spot starter. And Johnny Murphy, one of baseball's first closers, saved 19 games and led the American League, protecting leads with the reliability of a bank vault. The Yankees seized first place and never looked back. By May, they had the best record in baseball despite losing their 2 best players. By June, when DiMaggio returned, they began to pull away from the rest of the American League. By July, the pennant race was effectively over. By August, the only question was how many records they would break. The answer was a lot. They won 106 games and lost 45. They won the pennant by 17 games over the Boston Red Sox, who themselves had a young outfielder named Ted Williams, hitting .327 with 31 home runs in his rookie season. The Red Sox were excellent. The Yankees were in another universe. Their run differential of +411, 967 runs scored against 556 allowed, was the highest in baseball history. No team had ever outscored its opponents by 400 runs in a single season. To put that in perspective, plus 411 means the Yankees outscored their opponents by an average of nearly 3 runs per game, every single game for the entire season. Nearly a century later, no team has done it since. The record still stands. They posted the best road record in American League history, winning 54 of 75 games away from Yankee Stadium. Most teams struggle on the road. The 1939 Yankees were actually more dominant away from home than they were at Yankee Stadium. They won all 11 games at the St. Louis Browns' Sportsman's Park, meaning the Browns went 0-11 at home against the Yankees. Not one win. Not one. In 11 tries, on June 28th, in a doubleheader against the Philadelphia Athletics at Shea Park, the Yankees hit 13 home runs across the 2 games. An all-time record. DiMaggio, Gordon, and Dahlgren each hit 3 apiece. The scores were 23-2 and 10-0. The Athletics never had a chance. Red Ruffing once pitched a 21-0 shutout against those same Athletics and collected 4 hits himself. That is not a misprint. 21-0, the starting pitcher had 4 hits. That is what this team did. They did not just beat opponents, they erased them. The World Series matched the Yankees against the Cincinnati Reds, who had won the National League pennant with a 97-58 record. It was the Reds' first World Series appearance since 1919, the year of the infamous Black Sox scandal, when the Chicago White Sox had intentionally lost the series to Cincinnati. That tainted championship had haunted the Reds franchise for 2 decades. Their fans wanted a clean, legitimate title. They wanted to prove they could win one on their own terms. The Reds were led by 2 of the best pitchers in baseball. Bucky Walters had won 27 games, the most in the major leagues. Paul Derringer had won 25. Together, they had won 52 games, an extraordinary total for a 2-man rotation. Both had been named to the All-Star team. Their combined presence gave Cincinnati hope that they could compete with the 3-time defending champions. The Yankees had won 12 consecutive World Series games entering the series. They had won 28 of their last 31. They had not lost a World Series since 1926. They were the most dominant postseason team in the history of professional sports. It did not matter what the Reds had. The Yankees swept them in 4 games. Game 1 at Yankee Stadium was a masterpiece of tension. Red Ruffing squared off against Paul Derringer in a pitching duel that kept both teams scoreless through the early innings. The Reds scored first, pushing a run across in the 4th. The Yankees answered in the bottom of the 5th. The score stayed 1-1 through the 6th, 7th, and 8th innings. Neither team could break through. The crowd grew restless. Then in the bottom of the 9th inning, with the game on the line, Bill Dickey stepped to the plate with runners on base and lined a walk-off single into the outfield. The Yankees won 2-1. Ruffing pitched a complete game, allowing just 4 hits. It was the kind of gutsy, grinding victory that defined this team. They did not always overpower you. Sometimes they just outlasted you. Game 2 belonged to Monty Pearson, who produced one of the most remarkable pitching performances in World Series history. Pearson carried a no-hitter into the 8th inning, retiring batter after batter with a mix of fastballs and curves that the Reds could not touch. Ernie Lombardi, the Reds' burly catcher, finally broke it up with a clean single in the 8th. Pearson settled for a 2-hit shutout, winning 4-0. Babe Dahlgren, the man who had replaced the irreplaceable Lou Gehrig, hit a home run and a double. If anyone doubted whether Dahlgren could handle the pressure of the World Series stage while wearing a dead man's glove, he answered them that afternoon. Game 3 moved to Crosley Field in Cincinnati after a rain postponement, and it was Charlie Keller's turn to announce himself to the world. The 22-year-old rookie hit 2 home runs off starter Junior Thompson, one in the 1st inning and another in the 5th. He became the first rookie in history to hit 2 home runs in the same World Series game. DiMaggio added a 2-run blast. Dickey hit a solo shot. The Yankees won 7-3. The series was all but over. Game 4 was the strangest game of the series and produced one of the most infamous moments in World Series history. The Yankees led 2-0 in the 7th inning on home runs by Keller and Dickey off Derringer. But the Reds rallied for 3 unearned runs against reliever Steve Sundra to take a 3-2 lead. Johnny Murphy shut the door in the 8th, and the Yankees came back to tie the game in the 9th on Joe Gordon's RBI single. The score was 4-4 heading to the 10th inning. In the top of the 10th, with runners at the corners and 1 out, DiMaggio singled to right field. Frankie Crosetti scored from third to give the Yankees a 5-4 lead. Then came the play that would haunt Reds catcher Ernie Lombardi for the rest of his life. Charlie Keller, running from first, barreled around third and headed home. The throw from right fielder Ivel Goodman arrived at the same time Keller did. Keller was 6'1" and 200 pounds of raw muscle, running at full speed, and he crashed into Lombardi with the force of a freight train. The ball, Keller and Lombardi all collided simultaneously. Lombardi crumpled to the ground, the ball rolling a few feet away. He had been hit in the groin and was dazed, his body contorted in pain, struggling to locate the ball that had squirted loose. DiMaggio, who had been standing at first base when he singled, saw Lombardi lying on the ground and made a split-second decision. He sprinted from first base, rounded second, rounded third, and slid across home plate untouched, while Lombardi rolled on the dirt, still unable to retrieve the ball. 7-4 Yankees. 2 runs had scored on a play that should have produced 1. The press savaged Lombardi. They called it Schnotz's snooze, a reference to his prominent nose and the implication that he had simply fallen asleep at the plate. Cartoonists drew him napping, sports writers mocked him for years. It was deeply, cruelly unfair. Lombardi had been smashed by a 200-pound freight train of a rookie and hit in the most painful spot on the male body. He had not fallen asleep. He had been knocked senseless, but the narrative was set, and the play dogged him for the rest of his Hall of Fame career, turning a victim of a violent collision into a punchline that followed him to his grave. Johnny Murphy retired the Reds in the bottom of the 10th, stranding the tying run at the plate. The Yankees had won their 4th consecutive World Series championship, the first team in baseball history to accomplish the feat. No team had ever done it before. No National League team has done it since. Over those 4 consecutive championships from 1936 through 39, the Yankees compiled a postseason record of 16 wins and just 3 losses. They outscored their World Series opponents 113-52. They outhammered them 23-7. Their pitching staff posted a combined World Series ERA of 2.32. They had won 28 of their last 31 World Series games. No franchise in any sport had ever been this dominant in the postseason for this long. The Yankees had turned October into a formality. Joe McCarthy had now won 5 World Series titles as Yankees manager, tying the record held by Connie Mack. He had never lost a World Series. In 13 Fall Classic games over the past 2 years, his team had not lost once. 2 consecutive sweeps, 8 straight victories. McCarthy ran the Yankees the way a general runs an army. There was no room for error, no tolerance for excuses, and no sympathy for opponents. Charlie Keller was the undeniable star of the 1939 World Series, batting .438 with 3 home runs, 6 runs batted in, and 8 runs scored across the 4 games. He had arrived on the biggest stage in baseball as a 22-year-old rookie and performed like a grizzled veteran. There was no official World Series MVP award in 1939. The honor would not be introduced until 1955, but if there had been, Keller would have won it unanimously. Even the Reds would have voted for him. The 1939 New York Yankees are not always the first team people mention when they discuss the greatest teams in baseball history. The 1927 Yankees get that honor, with Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and Murderers Row and 60 home runs, and the batting practice legend that supposedly broke the Pittsburgh Pirates' spirit. The 1998 Yankees get mentioned with their 114 wins, their historic sweep of the World Series, and Derek Jeter's emergence as a national icon. But a strong case can be made, and the book Baseball Dynasties did make it, that the 1939 team was the best of them all. Not the most famous, not the most romanticized, the best. They are the only team in baseball history to outscore their opponents by more than 400 runs. Their plus 411 run differential has never been matched. Not by the 27 Yankees, not by the 98 Yankees, not by any team in over a century of baseball. They won 106 games despite losing their best first baseman to a fatal disease in early May and their best hitter to injury for the entire month of May. They won 27 of 31 games immediately after Gehrig's benching, a stretch of dominance that defied logic and emotion. Their pitching staff held opposing hitters to 241 when the league average was 279. They had 5 players drive in 100 or more runs. They set the all-time record for home runs in a doubleheader. They set the modern record for consecutive games with a run scored. They swept the World Series for the second consecutive year and won their 4th consecutive championship, a feat that would not be matched until the Yankees themselves won 5 straight from 1949 through 1953. And even those great 50s teams never matched the sheer quality and force of the 1936 through 1939 dynasty. And they did all of it while watching a teammate, a friend, a man they had played beside for years, slowly die in the dugout next to them. Lou Gehrig died on June 2, 1941, exactly 14 years to the day after he began his consecutive game streak. He was 37 years old. The Yankees erected a monument to him in center field at Yankee Stadium, joining the one they had built for Miller Huggins a decade earlier. It reads, "A man, a gentleman, and a great ball player, whose amazing record of 2,130 consecutive games should stand for all time. The Yankees he left behind in 1939 were the greatest team he ever played on." And the cruel irony is that they became the greatest team he ever played on precisely because he could no longer play. His absence forced the roster to prove that it was more than one man. It was. It was the deepest, most talented, most emotionally resilient team baseball had ever seen. They turned the most heartbreaking moment in baseball history into the most dominant season in baseball history. They honored a dying teammate not with tears but with wins. 106 of them in the regular season, plus 4 more in October. 110 victories in a season that began with a man saying he was no good to his team and ended with that team proving it was the best that had ever played the game. The 1939 New York Yankees, the team that played through the impossible, the team that turned grief into greatness, the team that proved a dynasty does not die when its heart stops beating. Like and subscribe for more baseball documentaries. Until next time.